Story 1. Home Alone Nightmare. The storm had been raging all day, but 13-year-old Kevin didn't mind. He loved thunderstorms, the flashes of lightning, the rumble of thunder, and the way rain pounded against the windows. It was the perfect setting for an evening of uninterrupted video gaming, especially when his parents had gone out for the night, leaving him home alone. The house was cozy, the light from the TV casting a warm glow in the dark living room. Kevin was so engrossed in the game that he barely noticed the growing intensity of the storm outside. The thunder rumbled and the wind howled, making the old house creak and groan, but nothing fazed him. He was too focused on getting through the next level. Then the doorbell rang. Kevin paused, his finger hovering over the controller. He hadn't expected anyone, and it was too late for visitors. The doorbell rang again, more insistent this time, followed by a loud knock. He hesitated, a tingle of unease running down his spine. His parents had warned him about opening the door to strangers, especially when he was alone. Peering out from behind the curtains, Kevin caught a glimpse of a man standing on the porch. The man was tall, dressed in dark, rain-soaked clothing, his face obscured by the hood of his coat. He seemed out of place, too ominous for a casual passerby seeking shelter from the storm. The man knocked again, harder this time, as if he knew Kevin was watching him. Fear took hold, and Kevin backed away from the window, his heart pounding. He knew better than to answer. The man called out, his voice muffled by the rain, but Kevin couldn't make out what he was saying. The stranger knocked again, louder, more persistent. Kevin's pulse quickened. He turned off the TV. The room went dark and stood still, hoping the man would think the house was empty and leave. A few minutes passed, and finally the knocking stopped. Kevin let out a shaky breath, but the relief was short-lived. A loud crash echoed from the back of the house, followed by the sound of shattering glass. The intruder was inside. Kevin was overcome with panic. He needed to get out, get help, but the man was in the house. He could hear heavy footsteps on the floor, the stranger approaching, room by room. Kevin's mind raced. He had to be quick. He had to be quiet. He slipped out of the living room and into the hallway, hiding in the shadows. The only way out was through the garage. His breath caught in his throat as he moved silently, his heart pounding so hard he feared the intruder might hear him. As he reached the garage door, he heard footsteps behind him, closer now. Without thinking, Kevin threw the door open and rushed into the garage, slamming the door shut behind him. He fumbled with the lock, his hand shaking. The footsteps were just outside the door. He could hear the man's gasping breaths, could almost feel him on the other side. Kevin didn't wait. He pressed the button to open the garage door, a loud rumble filling the air as the door was lifted. Rain poured in, and without hesitation, Kevin ran out into the night, his feet pounding on the wet pavement as he ran to his neighbor's house. He didn't stop until he reached their door, pounding furiously. When the door finally opened, Kevin stumbled inside, gasping for air, his words coming out in a panic. Neighbors called the police, and soon the flashing lights of patrol cars illuminated the dark, stormy night. The intruder was caught, handcuffed, and taken away, but the fear remained. Kevin knew he would never forget that night. The night a harmless thunderstorm turned into a living nightmare. Story 2. A horrifying encounter in a storm. The storm had come quickly, the sky darkening to an ominous gray as the wind picked up, howling through the trees. I had always loved thunderstorms, the way they made the world outside seem alive, powerful. That night, I sat by the window watching the lightning streak across the sky, each one illuminating the room for a brief, electric moment. The power suddenly went out, plunging the house into darkness. I sighed, groping my way to the kitchen for a flashlight and a glass of water. The patter of rain on the roof was soothing, a steady rhythm that almost masked the eerie creaking of the house as it settled down. When I reached the kitchen, I noticed something that made my heart skip a beat. The porch door was open. I was sure I had closed it before the storm began. The wind blew the curtains open, rain splashing to the floor. I froze, staring at the door, trying to remember if I'd left it open. My mind was racing with doubt. I slowly approached the door, my pulse quickening with each step. The darkness outside was impenetrable, the storm obscuring everything beyond the threshold. My hand shook as I reached for the doorknob, quickly pulling it closed, but the unease didn't leave me. It clung to me like a second skin, making my heart pound wildly in my chest. I told myself it was nothing. Maybe the wind had blown the door open, and I'd simply forgotten to lock it. But as I returned to bed, the silence in the house seemed heavier, more oppressive. I crawled under the covers, pulling the covers up to my chin, trying to shake off the feeling that something was wrong. And then I heard it, a soft, almost inaudible rustling from under the bed. My breath caught in my throat. I strained to listen, hoping it was just the house settling down, the wind rattling the windows. But there it was again, a soft scratching, like fingernails on a wooden floor. Slowly, very slowly, I leaned over the edge of the bed, my heart pounding in my chest. The darkness beneath the bed seemed to stretch on forever, an abyss that could hide anything. My hand shook as I reached for my phone, the faint glow of the screen illuminating the floor beneath me. And then I saw her. A woman, impossibly thin and frail, her eyes wide and bloodshot, staring at me from the darkness. Her hair was tangled, plastered to her skull, and her skin was pale, almost transparent. She was very still, her chest barely rising and falling with her shallow breaths. For a moment, I was paralyzed with fear, unable to move, unable to scream. Her eyes locked on me, and in that moment, I knew she was lurking there, waiting, watching. I bolted out of bed, my mind screaming at me to run, to get out of the house. I could hear her crawling out from under the bed as I ran down the hall, my feet barely touching the ground. I didn't dare look back, didn't want to see her right behind me. I dashed out of the house, the cold rain hitting my face like needles as I ran through the storm to my grandparents' house next door. I pounded on the door, my voice shaking as I called out to them. My grandfather answered, his face etched with worry. When I told him what I'd seen, his expression hardened. He grabbed his old pistol from the closet and ran out into the rain, my grandmother holding me tight as we waited. When he returned, he was soaked to the skin, but there was no sign of the woman. He told me that my door was wide open, swinging in the wind, but the house was empty. The police had searched the area, but found nothing, no sign of an intruder. But I knew what I had seen. I knew she was there, lurking in the shadows, waiting. And every time the wind howled, every time the storm came, I couldn't help but wonder if she was out there, still watching, still waiting. Story 3. A terrifying experience at a remote cabin. The cabin was supposed to be our getaway, a chance for my husband and I to escape the chaos of everyday life and reconnect in the peace of the wilderness. We rented a small mobile home deep in the woods, miles from the nearest town. It was perfect, quiet, isolated, a world away from the constant noise and stress of the city. The first night, a storm rolled in, the rain pounding against the roof like 1,000 tiny hammers. We didn't mind. The sound was soothing, a reminder that we were truly alone here, surrounded by nature. We spent the evenings by the fire, the warmth and crackling flames providing a cozy atmosphere as the storm raged outside. But as the night wore on, a sense of unease began to creep over me. It started with little things, the creaking of the floorboards, the way the wind seemed to howl through the trees a little too loudly. My husband tried to reassure me, blaming the old cabin and the storm for the noises, but the feeling of being watched persisted, gnawing at my mind. We went to bed, the storm lulling us into a fitful sleep. I woke in the middle of the night to a strange sound, a soft tapping, as if something or someone was tapping on the window. I sat up, listening, but the sound had stopped, leaving only the steady patter of rain. I lay back down, telling myself it was just a branch hitting the glass, but sleep did not come easily. I kept looking out the window, half expecting to see a face peering in from the dark. The next day, it was still raining, a steady downpour that turned the ground outside into a muddy mess. We spent most of our time indoors, reading and talking, trying to ignore the unease that was creeping up on us both. Occasionally, I caught my husband glancing at the window, his face tense, but he said nothing. That evening, as we were preparing dinner, we heard a soft knock again, this time from the front door. My husband stiffened, squinting toward the door. He motioned for me to step back as he went to check, peering through the peephole. "No one's there," he said, his voice low, but I could hear the doubt in his voice. Since Gio joined him at the door, looking out at the rain-soaked clearing. It was empty, the only movement coming from the trees swaying in the wind, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't alone. We locked the door and tried to get on with our evening, but the tension was palpable. Every creak of the cabin, every gust of wind, made us jump. My husband held the rifle tight, his eyes glancing toward the door every few minutes. Then, just as we were about to sit down to eat, we heard a noise, a loud bang against the side of the cabin, followed by footsteps. My husband grabbed the rifle, his face grim with determination as he headed for the door. He motioned for me to follow him, and we slowly made our way outside, the flashlight cutting through the darkness. The rain had stopped, but the night was still dark, the trees casting long, threatening shadows. We circled the cabin, my heart pounding in my chest, but saw no one. Just as we were about to head back inside, we heard a rustling sound coming from the edge of the... We turned, and there, standing just beyond the trees, was a figure. It was a man, tall and thin, his clothes soaked with rain. He didn't move, just stood there, watching us with cold, calculating eyes. "Back off," my husband yelled, raising his rifle. The man didn't flinch, didn't even blink. He just stood there, staring at us, a twisted smile slowly spreading across his face. My husband fired a warning shot into the air, the loud bang echoing through the woods. The man didn't move. It was as if the sound hadn't even registered. And then, as suddenly as he had appeared, he turned and disappeared into the darkness of the woods. We didn't sleep that night. We stayed awake, huddled together with the rifle between us, listening for any sign that the man had returned. When dawn finally broke, we packed up and left, not even bothering to clean the cabin. The police found no trace of an intruder, no tracks, no evidence that anyone had been there. But we knew what we had seen. We knew we were being watched, stalked by something or someone. We never returned to that cabin. The memory of that man standing in the rain, his eyes full of malice, still haunts us. And every time I hear footsteps in the night, I can't help but wonder if he's still out there, still watching, still waiting.